Some friendships are written in music, but only a few stand the test of time. Captain Sensible and Brian James were more than just bandmates. They were brothers in arms, rebels who shaped the sound of punk rock together. But now, that era has lost one of its brightest stars. The world of music has been shaken by the heartbreaking news of Brian James' passing, leaving fans and friends alike in mourning. Captain Sensible, known for his wit and humor, found himself at a loss for words. How do you say goodbye to someone who changed your life forever? The news spread like wildfire. Fans who grew up with their music couldn't believe it. Social media flooded with tributes, old concert footage resurfaced, and messages poured in from all corners of the world. Some called it the end of an era. Others simply asked, how could this happen? But for Captain Sensible, this wasn't just the loss of a fellow musician. It was the loss of a friend who had walked beside him through the highs and lows of fame, chaos, and creativity. In the silence that followed, memories rushed in like echoes from the past. The first time they met, the first chord they played together, the long nights of laughter, arguments, and making music that would change history. Captain Sensible had always been the outspoken one, the joker of the band. But when it came to Brian, the words didn't come easy. This wasn't just another obituary, this was personal. And as he sat down to pay tribute, one thought lingered in his mind. How do I even begin to say goodbye? Before punk rock exploded into the world, before the Damned made history, there was a young musician with a fire in his soul. Brian James wasn't just another guitarist, he was a visionary. Born Brian Robertson in 1955, he grew up immersed in rock and roll, drawn to the raw energy of bands like the Stooges and MC5. But he wasn't content with just listening. He wanted to create something new, something that hadn't been done before. By the early 70s, he was already making waves in London's underground music scene, but it wasn't until 1976 that everything changed. That was the year punk was born, and Brian James was at its very heart. When Brian formed The Damned, he wasn't just starting another band, he was leading a revolution. With Captain Sensible on bass, Dave Vanian on vocals, and Rat Scabies on drums, they were raw, aggressive, and completely unpredictable. They didn't just play fast, they played like they had something to prove. Brian's songwriting became the backbone of their sound, and in 1977, they made history with New Rose, the first ever British punk single. The song was an explosion of energy, a declaration that punk had arrived. Their debut album, Damned, 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 was a masterpiece of controlled chaos, and Brian James was its architect. Without him, there would be no Damned. But as quickly as they rose, tensions began to brew. By 1978, Brian had left the band, moving on to new projects like Tans der Youth and the Lords of the New Church. He never stopped pushing boundaries, never stopped playing. His influence spread beyond the Damned, inspiring generations of musicians. Punk legends, from The Clash to the Sex Pistols, acknowledged his role in shaping the genre, and through it all, one thing remained constant: his friendship with Captain Sensible. They had their differences, their fights, but the bond never broke. And now that bond faced its greatest test yet: saying goodbye. It started with a quiet whisper, a rumor spreading through the punk community. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Brian James, the man who helped ignite the British punk movement, was gone. It didn't seem real, but soon the news was everywhere. Social media flooded with shocked reactions. Tributes poured in from musicians and fans alike. Some refused to accept it, refreshing their screens, hoping it was just another internet hoax. But then came the confirmation. The weight of reality hit like a hammer. Brian James had passed away, and punk rock had lost one of its founding fathers. For Captain Sensible, the world seemed to stand still. He had spent years side by side with Brian, creating music that would outlive them both. But now, that music was all that remained. He sat in silence, staring at his phone, unable to process the words staring back at him. The last time they spoke played over in his mind. It was just a few weeks ago. Nothing unusual, just two old friends reminiscing, laughing about the past. Had there been any signs? Anything he missed? The thought haunted him. If only he had known, would he have said something different? As the shock turned into grief, memories came rushing back. The first time they met, Brian had that unmistakable spark, a confidence that made you believe he was destined for something bigger. Captain Sensible remembered their first gigs, playing to half-empty rooms, smashing through songs with reckless energy. Then came the moment everything changed, recording New Rose, stepping into the studio as a nobody, and walking out as a legend. Brian was more than just a guitarist. He was a force of nature. Now that force was gone, leaving behind only echoes of a life lived loud. The music world mourned, but for Captain Sensible, the loss was personal. He thought back to the times they clashed, arguments over songs, creative differences, even moments when they swore they'd never speak again. But no matter how far apart life took them, their connection never truly faded. That's the thing about friendships built in music. They don't break. They might bend, twist, or be tested by time, but when the music starts playing, it all comes rushing back. And now, with Brian's passing, the music felt heavier, filled with meaning that wasn't there before. Captain Sensible had always been known for his humor, his larger-than-life personality, and his refusal to take things too seriously. But when it came to Brian James, there were no jokes, only raw, unfiltered emotion. As he sat down to write his tribute, the words didn't come easily. How do you sum up a lifetime of friendship, a musical partnership that defined an era, in just a few sentences? He thought about Brian's impact, not just on the Damned, but on punk itself. Without Brian, there would be no New Rose, no Damned. He wasn't just a musician, he was the blueprint. When Captain Sensible finally spoke about Brian, his words carried the weight of decades. Brian James was the reason the Damned existed, he wrote. He had the songs, the drive, the attitude. Without him, we'd have never gotten off the ground. It was a simple truth, but one that needed to be said. Fans of the Damned had always celebrated their chaotic energy, but few realized just how much of that fire came from Brian. He wasn't just part of the band, he was the foundation. And now that foundation had crumbled. The loss wasn't just personal, it was historic. As fans and fellow musicians paid their respects, it became clear just how deep Brian's influence ran. Punk legends from all over the world shared their stories, memories of meeting him, of watching him play, of hearing New Rose for the first time and realizing that punk had truly arrived. But no tribute was more powerful than Captain Sensible's own. He didn't just mourn Brian as a bandmate, he mourned him as a brother. We fought, we laughed, we played, he said, and now the stage feels empty without him. But perhaps the most touching moment came when Captain Sensible shared a personal memory, a story few had heard before. Back in the early days, when money was tight and fame was just a distant dream, Brian had offered him a place to stay. He didn't have much, but he gave what he could, Captain Sensible recalled. That was Brian, a true friend through and through. It was a side of Brian that the world rarely saw, the man behind the music, the heart behind the legend. And now that heart had stopped beating. The world keeps spinning and time moves on, but some losses leave a mark that never fades. Brian James may be gone, but his music, his energy, and his legacy will never die. Every time New Rose blasts through a speaker, every time a young musician picks up a guitar and plays with reckless abandon, his spirit lives on. But for those who knew him best, especially Captain Sensible, the silence he leaves behind is deafening. The stage feels emptier, the music a little quieter, and yet in every song they once played together, Brian's presence is still there, woven into every note, every lyric, every moment that defined a movement. Captain Sensible knows this isn't the end. Not really. Punk rock is built on rebellion, on refusing to be forgotten. Brian James's influence will outlive us all, carried forward by the next generation of musicians who will pick up where he left off. But still, grief is a heavy thing, and no amount of loud guitars can drown out the pain of losing a friend. If you've ever been touched by Brian's music, Captain Sensible said, play it loud tonight. Let the world hear what he gave us. And so, around the world, fans turned up the volume, letting Brian's legacy echo through the night. Now, we turn to you. What are your favorite memories of Brian James? What was the first song of his that changed the way you saw music? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's fill this space with stories, with tributes, with the love and respect that Brian deserves. Because legends don't fade. They live on in the hearts of those who remember. Rest in peace, Brian James. The world won't forget you. Brian James was more than just a musician. He was a pioneer, a legend, and a true force in punk rock. Though he may no longer be with us, his music and influence will live on forever. Every chord he played, every song he wrote, shaped a generation, and his legacy will continue to inspire musicians and fans alike. If Brian's music ever meant something to you, if his songs were part of your journey, let's honor him together. Share your favorite memory of Brian James in the comments below. Which song of his changed the way you saw music? How did his work inspire you? Let's make this a space filled with love, respect, and gratitude for everything he gave us. And if you found this tribute meaningful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that honor the legends who shaped music history. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a tribute to those who made an impact. Rest in peace, Brian James. Your music will never be forgotten.